Welcome back to the channel, everyone. I don't know if you saw it today, but Palantir dropped an amazing demo of HyperAuto on LinkedIn. Um, I'm going to show you some clips from that here, and we're going to break down what I'm calling the sort of this will be sort of a reference architecture in how you can use Foundry in the auto industry. But there's an implication in here I think a lot of people are missing too as well, so I want to focus on it. And I just want to play a quick clip from my first video I ever did on Palantir back in January of 2021, where I made the claim that ERP and CRM, as we know it, is dead. What does this mean, right? Like, what does this mean? It means that ERP and CRM is dead. Okay, this effectively means that the way we do business today is going away, and this is going to affect some major players in a big way. And more importantly, human-centric software is dead. It just doesn't know it yet, right? This is a photo from the Amundsen expedition where all these people died as being a result of being trapped in the Arctic ice. But anyway, I like to point to this as like, the writing's on the wall, the industry's moving, and the way we do business today is done. It's going to take a long time. Like, I'm not saying it's going to happen tomorrow. We're talking decades here, but there's no going back. Okay, so we're out on the ice. It's sink or swim, and Palantir is going to take a sledgehammer to all of these companies, right?
How they can go ahead and solve these things kind of within their supply chains. So first, let's see how we can extract the necessary data from the underlying ERPs. At Palantir, we've spent the best part of 2 decades tackling some of the world's most formidable data integration challenges alongside our customers. From aerospace to manufacturing and healthcare, we've seen the same core data systems over and over again. SAP, Oracle, Salesforce, and so on. Common ERPs and CRMs have become ubiquitous across industries. Each time we encounter one of these systems, we need to deploy a team of engineers, or our customers do, or our partners do, to write custom code to extract, clean, and transform the underlying data into something that can actually be used for analytics or for decision making. Instead of continuing to reinvent the wheel and wasting precious resources, we developed a capability that we call HyperAuto. HyperAuto utilizes what we kind of coin as software defined data integration to expedite the process of getting data out of these systems and into a usable form. So our partners can use their data for valuable use cases as quickly as possible. The key to HyperAuto automation is the ability to use the metadata within the ERP or the CRM system to inform how to transform the data. This metadata contains important information about the data and how it's structured, so users can quickly understand what they're looking at and find the information they need to solve the problem at hand. So let's go ahead and just like jump into software and start like showing what this looks like and kind of like how it can be used. Awesome. So this is kind of before we think about bringing this data in, we need to kind of think about like previewing this data to understand it a little bit more. We kind of give, and this will be in the context of like SAP as the kind of end source ERP. We kind of give two ways to explore this data before actually ingesting it. First is by logical module. So these can be like CRM, financial accounting, material management, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really easy for me to find one of our like the common tables within an SAP system, Mara, and quickly understand kind of all the information about this table, and most importantly, the relationships that this table has with other information within the ERP itself. What's really important to note here is we're not predefining any of this information. None of the column namings, none of the relationships that Mara has with other information within the system. We're utilizing the metadata that's within these ERPs to actually derive this for us, and actually also derive data pipelines for us as well. The other way to kind of like preview this data is by common workflows. So if this is like, hey, I just want to extract all data from an ERP and start bringing this in by kind of like logical modules, so all material data, all financial accounting data. The other way to kind of look at this is like, hey, I want to go solve a problem. I want to go look at proactive customer service. So I want to identify sales orders that are going to be disrupted because of late process orders or production orders or purchase orders, so that I can be more proactive with my customers and what's going on within my supply chain or with my vendors. The one we'll focus on today is supply chain disruption. So in this case, again, we've done these use cases a number of times with our partners across industries. And so we can say, in order to do this type of use case, which is looking at raw materials and then being able to kind of find shortages and understand the impacts on sales orders and customers, and then find ways in which we can actually like try and fix these things, we kind of bundle all the tables that are needed from the underlying ERP into this concept of a use case, and then extract it and transform it and harmonize it, but also then apply downstream templates to get it into a further form to go do this type of use case. So since we're going to do the supply chain disruption use case, I'll go ahead and add it to my inbox or my shopping cart rather, and then I can go and configure kind of the syncs for this particular use case. And ultimately, what this produces is a data pipeline. What we're looking at here is a data lineage graph. Kind of each box represents a data set, and the lines between those boxes are transformation dependencies. With HyperAuto, the cool thing is that I don't have to write any code to be able to build a pipeline like this. I can select the use case that I'm going to do, and ultimately what HyperAuto will do will one, automatically and generate the dynamic code to actually bring this data in and get it into a usable form, and then apply any downstream transformations that are necessary to go and actually do this use case to get it into kind of what we call ontology or a semantic layer that makes sense based on the underlying data. So things that are familiar to a business like plants and customers and customer material demand. And so the other cool thing that what HyperAuto does here is we kind of track the provenance of every data set within the platform and the transformation, that logic that was applied to it to get it into its current form. So at any point in this pipeline, I can kind of, if I want to drill into one of these data sets, I can get a preview of what the data looks like at that particular part of the data pipeline, as well as the code that was used to generate this piece of data from all the inputs across the different ERP system. And this is kind of what we need in terms of like a white box approach, meaning that like we are going to generate all of the transformation logic that gets the data ready for the use case using the metadata within the ERP itself. And then we have templates to then kind of lay on top of this data to get it into further form, more useful form, to actually go and generate the correct kind of form for this particular use case. All of the code that is used to kind of like get the data ready is transparent and kind of accessible. And then on top of that, I can pop it open into a kind of a more of a code repository type of setting to enhance it or change it based on the nuance of my business that I want to include into this pipeline. So that's a little bit about like HyperAuto. The cool thing about this is after being able to connect to an underlying ERP system or multiple ERP systems, a pipeline like this can be generated in days. Mostly like the stick in the mud is going to be like data transfer, being able to extract it from the underlying ERP, and then ultimately then building out this pipeline. To kind of zoom in a little bit more on what's happening within this particular data pipeline, what I did in this particular data pipeline when I deployed that use case is I have all kind of the data sets that I need to go and understand this data sets, and then I'll kind of zoom in on what this use case is specifically doing. So at the top, these blue boxes are kind of where we're taking all of that data from the ERP and coming up with a very granular understanding of the inventory of different materials at different locations on different dates across kind of plants or locations within the business. So if I just open up the inventory daily KPI data set, I think this is a really good example where we produce kind of like every row here is a material and a plant and a date, both looking into the past as well as looking into the future based on like planned purchase orders or process orders or stock transfer orders. to understand inventory value, quantity, consumption value, consumption quantity, inflows, nets, safety stock, things like that. Versus the bottom part of this pipeline is kind of looking at the bill of materials and saying, hey, I want to look at my customer demand coming in the form of sales orders. And I want to be able to take that customer demand, both the revenue associated with those sales orders, as well as the physical demand for final goods, and to be able to kind of traverse that back through my bill of materials at every layer of my bill of materials, both final, intermediate, and raw, so that it's really easy to compare apples to apples to say, what do I have in terms of my inventory, both in the past as well in the future, for every material at every plant at every given day, as well as what's the demand for this material driven from sales orders through every kind of component within my bill of materials. And ultimately, all of this kind of data is then flowing into this like simplistic model, the simplistic data model that kind of describes this particular supply chain, or a generic kind of supply chain. So I'm able to flow all that data into common nouns and verbs and how they're connected between customers and plants and material dependencies and purchase orders and sales orders, kind of common nouns and verbs that that folks within a business are more kind of more familiar with. Just to give you an indication of kind of like speed, this data, I know I said this before, but this data can be extracted from your ERPs and modeled into this pipeline within a matter of hours or days. One recent partner in the heavy manufacturing space, they were able to build out this foundation in the matter of 1 week. HyperAuto provides a huge acceleration to value, so your organization can start focusing on actually solving this problem rather than like integrating, getting all the data together for months or potentially years to go and try and solve this problem. So with that, I'll stop talking about data pipelines.
So if you've ever wondered what the death of ERP would look like, here it is. So what's really interesting in there is the first part where he says, they created this like template system out of, because they'd solved this problem over and over again. They figured out a way to templatize it, and that's what we refer to as a reference architecture in software engineering. So like we've gone through this pain a million times. We know how to generalize it for all people who have a similar problem. And then what they do is they essentially have figured out how to build these workflows from that will take you from a raw state of your data in the ERP system out to an actual thing delivering business value as part of the workflow. You've only seen the first half of this video, which is how do we get the data out of the ERP system and so we can get ERP out of your way, right? But by solving it in this templatized way, it's a white box solution, meaning you install it, you push the button, and it does it. Okay? So there's like no custom coding required. There is some networking. We're going to get into a little bit of some of how the networking works. The network could be a bottleneck in some scenarios, but again, he explained it in the video. That's just a few days of ingest to get everything into the system. The actual updates are actually really, really fast moving forward. But the bottom line is that you push the button, it's a white box solution, and it actually has not only just the ability to move the data in and model it any way you might choose to, it has pre-built solutions that deliver value. That's that portion where you're selecting from the workflows menu. That's like, here's how you solve actual problems with this tool and the supply chain, right? And what's cool about that, I know you all probably missed it, there's an integrated IDE layer that sits on top of those solutions, so you can make changes and version those changes with strict quality controls. There's an entire engineering ops layer in there for you to customize this white box solution to your business's needs. Do you have any fucking idea how much work goes into building that at every company right now? They're investing millions upon millions of dollars in engineering ops workflows that are built on top of 30 other SaaS platforms and ERP systems that does what this guy just showed you in a click of a button.
A data set that holds key inventory KPIs for every plant and material at every date. Both looking to the past as well as looking to the future. So I can get kind of an understanding of what inventory is going to do, both historically as well as into the future. If I think about inventory almost like a general ledger, where purchase orders are additions to it, or stock orders potentially are additions to it, and then process orders or production orders or sales orders or subtractions to it, I can kind of take this information and model a general ledger of inventory over time. So I'm going to go ahead and just pop it into one of the analytical tools within the platform that we call Contour. Contour is a low code, no code analytical tool. The way this is like for kind of like Excel jockeys that get frustrated by, a million row limitations of Excel, and they want to be able to do these types of kind of interactions with data at scale. So the way that you can think about using Contour is I can configure visualizations and I can configure filters to kind of understand the data and continue to drill down into data to answer certain types of questions. So with this particular data set, I want to find all of the troubling kind of like materials and plants that are getting into trouble, where like the inventory quantity is starting to fall under safety stock, under minimum safety stock, or into like zero or negative territory where there's a backlog dependent upon like unfulfilled purchase orders. So if I pop open to my Contour analysis, I'm going to go ahead and get a quick preview of the data just to make sure I'm looking at the thing I want to look at. Yep, this is the same data set. And then I'm going to start to filter down to rows that kind of meet these types of conditions. So I could do a filter, but I'm going to use our expression board to kind of type out a little bit more complicated of a filter here. So I'm going to go to library, do a filter. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to look for when my minimum safety stock is above zero. I kind of want to look at clean data here. And then I want to look at when my inventory quantity is less than my minimum safety stock. And so I can hit apply. Sorry, let me go ahead. Oh, I forgot my and statement. So I can go ahead and apply, and I go down from what I was starting at of around 2.3 million rows of data down to 362 rows. If I want to get another preview of what this data looks like, I can just use my table widget to kind of get a preview and kind of see the materials and plants. To get a better understanding, I'm going to use what we call our grid board to kind of see which materials and plants are the worst offenders. So I'll put my material on my y-axis, my plant on my x-axis, and then kind of get a count of those combinations. So over here, I can see all my plants: Denver, Moline, Milwaukee, Shenandoah. And then on the bottom, I can see the problematic materials at those plants: axles, flange screws, hoods, metal plates. And then I get a kind of color coding of which combinations are the worst offenders. Up at the top right-hand corner, I can see that the spring locking pin at my Denver location is the worst offender. So I can just actually click on that square, and this is automatically going to put a filter or condition of how I want to like filter down on this data. So then I'm just going to get a quick table preview. And yes, this is all my spring locking pins at my Denver location. So my next question might be like, how has this like material at this plant kind of looked over time? So what I'm going to do really quickly is I'm just going to quickly duplicate this analysis. And then instead of kind of looking for these troublesome, like instances or days when inventory is less than my minimum safety stock, I'm just going to delete that filter, but I'm going to keep the filter on spring locking pin as my material and Denver as my plant, so that I'm looking at all instances of this plant and material. And then I'm just going to configure a quick chart to see what this looks like over time. So here I can configure a line chart, and I'm going to have date as my x-axis, my inventory quantity plotted against my minimum safety stock, plotted against my safety stock. I can compute and save. So here I can kind of see the blue line is my inventory quantity. The green line is my safety stock, and then my red line is my minimum safety stock. So again, if I kind of think about my inventory quantity as a general ledger over time of like additions and of subtractions of this quantity of the spring locking pin at Denver, I can definitely see that over time I'm getting into a lot of trouble. And there's actually an instance kind of in March, late February, early March, where I'm actually falling under zero, going into negative quantity, which means like there's a backlog of this material. There are pending production orders and process orders and sales orders that are not being met because I don't have that material at this particular plant to actually go make those things. So this is highly problematic. I could expect that there's going to be a loss of production utilization, a loss of delivery utilization and truck capacity, not only a loss of kind of like the impact on my customers of not being able to deliver the items that I want to deliver to them at the date that I promised them. So, just to kind of rehash what I went through, I know I just went through a ton, but I was able to kind of like set up a pipeline for a particular workflow using HyperAuto to quickly get data out of an ERP and kind of quickly transform it into this like usable semantic layer. I was then able to kind of like interrogate a data set and start to understand what's happening within that data, and what's happening within my supply chain from an inventory perspective. The next thing, which I'll hand over to Andy really quickly, is how do I deploy kind of like workflows on top of this data, on top of this data asset?
All right. So why is ERP dead, right? Well, why in the fuck would I want to use systems that have net promoter scores that tend to go negative? Okay, so like most of these ERP systems have like negative net promoter scores, which means people fucking hate them. They are the bane of they cannot stand these things, right? When you go into work every day and you have to work on these fucking things, it's like you spend half the day fighting for these systems, trying to get wrangled together 1 ounce of actionable insight, and by the time you're done, you're fucking exhausted and you cannot stand it, right? So like these systems are ripe for disruption and removal, and what you just saw took someone like, I can't imagine the integration team that it would have taken to produce that much value out of a system. Like, find me the company that has managed to cobble together their Frankenstein monster of ERPs, and it's usually plural for some fucking reason, that have managed to deliver that much value that you just saw in that demo with a user experience that fucking good. It doesn't exist. It does not exist. This is a 0 to 1 move that is going to reshape how we do business. Now let's take a look at some of the network architectures just to dive in. Bear with me. The reason you want to know this is it does speak to some of the potential problems. There aren't any really. This is all solved problem space. They have this as a box product. But basically, like the customer's running over here. Like let's take AWS because this is an easy one for most people to wrap their brain around. And inside, the customer typically has multiple accounts, so they have multiple VPCs. But let's just imagine, for simplicity's sake, that in this example, the ERP systems are sitting inside the same VPC, and they're inside the same private subnet. Basically, what happens is you hook up to Palantir's cloud, right, which they do have their own SaaS infrastructure. This is their VPC running in their infrastructure in AWS. You link together via Transit Gateway or some other IP whitelisting scenario, but I'm assuming they support Transit Gateway with private link. You can then route in Foundry, connect to all those data sources out of the box with the tool he showed you, where you push the button, right? You push the button for the workflow, it'll go out, it'll capture all of the data out of these systems. All you had to do was enable the networking, which is super easy, and then populate the data. Now, the network can be a bottleneck when you're initially pulling in all of this data, but after you've gotten all the data in, you can then just get the updates, which is near real time. It's actually really, really fast. And so, but what this is enabling is like a leapfrog, right? So like, because the users for Palantir system Foundry can just come in as a web application. This traffic is routed through the internet and it's accessible, and you don't need to go back to these solutions. Why would you do that? You have everything you need, including the business outcome you're trying to enable, straight inside of Foundry. So let's take a look at it another way, okay? So like, and this will really help you wrap your brain around of everything that's in Foundry, all right? So like, he just showed you this layer so far. This is all you've really seen. And you haven't even, he briefly showed you the engineering ops layer. Francisco's been doing a really good job in his videos on the developer channel, showing you guys what's in the engineering ops layer in more detail. And check out those videos on Palantir's developer channel or my video breaking it down. But he's only showing you this layer, right? Like, you haven't even gotten into the ML ops features, the AI capabilities. You haven't even seen the low to no code React application layer. Like there is a demo of some of the out of box stuff for the what if scenarios, which you're going to get to see in a little bit. But so far, you've just seen this, and think how much value is there. And what I want you to realize is like it's going to become questionable whether these companies, including Snowflake, are still relevant if Foundry can deliver this much value. And if they're already on Foundry, you know how easy these are to remove. Is everyone watching? Just watch. Here we go. Boom. That's how easy they are to remove. Okay, because all the data is already in their fucking system, and everyone's going to be trained on how to use Foundry because it's that awesome. Because the Net Promoter Scores fucking suck on this other software. When people start to realize what is in the box, they they are going to freaking have their minds melted.
Thing which I'll hand over to Andy really quickly is how do I deploy kind of like workflows on top of this data, on top of this data asset, so that it's not, you know, a nerd like me doing data analysis and kind of being like in a corner saying like we have problems, but I can actually surface these things to operators within the business, to the people that are making decisions, supply chain analysts, production managers, customer service representatives, so they can find when these things are happening more proactively and then work through solutions to say like how big of a problem is this and how can I look at fixing it. So with that, I'll stop and pause, and I'll hand it over to Andy to kind of go through that portion.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Danny. And yeah, I'm super excited to talk about how we can take that, super powerful HyperAuto output that Danny was talking about and really supercharge our business operations by layering on top the supply chain archetype. And the supply chain archetype, which I'll flash up here in a minute, what it really does is it takes in that semantic layer of, how does everything in the supply chain connect from the hand of the supplier to the hand of the customer, and then layer on top of it the common models and KPIs and aspects that we track as supply chain experts. So these are things like your on time in full or your inventory timeline. How is that going to look out into the future? Or really anything else that we see commonly across supply chains that we can connect straight to. On top of that, then applications. So how do we start to interact with and drive our supply chain in a proactive, forward-looking manner so that it's, not just analytics, but it's operations and actions and decisions and bringing all of these things together. So I'm going to pop open my screen share right now, and what you're going to see here as I share my screen is one view of my supply chain archetype. And what you see here is kind of that next level under the hood of the different applications that an operator can quickly use to drive their supply chain. And I'm going to dig in specifically to that locking pin that Danny just brought up because he noticed that he's seeing out of stock events into the future. So, how can we take that same analytics that he's created and create alerts and then resolve the alerts when these events occur? So, what you see here is kind of my business user facing application that allows me to quickly alert on what badness looks like in my supply chain. And what I can do here is I've already created a stock out event alert for you guys. But what you can see here is actually one of the tools here is this import from Contour. And so this actually enables me to take Danny's analytics and operationalize it with the click of a button. And I won't go into every detail of what the alert is doing, but at a high level, I'll show you some aspects. We're filtering down our inventory timelines. This is what's our inventory doing out in the future when that hits zero. And, we're just doing some, basic stuff. We're focusing on the next 60 days, for example, because, maybe that's, our operational timeline. But as I, take a look at this, what you'll notice is that much of the, logic that you see here, it really is the same kind of logic that you would have available to you in other tools you're familiar with, but with the power of the underlying ontology. And once I've created this alert, what I have at hand is automatically an alert inbox that allows me to resolve the alert in an optimal way. So if I filter down to the high level alerts, so these are the most critical alerts in my organization, we'll see that in fact, that same spring locking pin that Danny brought up, we have a high priority alert that's impacting almost $30,000 of sales at Plant Denver. So my immediate question as kind of a supply chain operator is how can I go and solve this problem and take action? And when I jump into my kind of operational tool here, what we can see is that I have everything at hand to now make an informed decision. So I filtered down to my spring locking pin at Plant Denver, and we can see the inventory timeline, how that's progressing over time, and this stock out event that's happening in March. This is what I need to resolve. And I can see at hand everything I need, like where is this being used in production as production usage and when. What's my availability? Do I have the opportunity to transfer material maybe from my plant at San Diego or my plant at Munich? And then I can take action and simulate kind of in a parallel universe what happens if I take a specific action. So I'm going to take a look at San Diego because San Diego is the closest place to Denver that has a lot of inventory. I can see that honestly at San Diego, I've got over 900 units for a while. So that's a good candidate to do a transfer order. And I'm going to execute that transfer order right here in my operational tool that allows me to basically say, hey, we're going to bring into Plant Denver from Plant San Diego my spring locking pin. And from here, I can, select an arrival date. It's going to come in on the 28th, say, and we'll do 400 units. And, just for bookkeeping, we'll track what my scenario name is. And once we apply this action, we can see in real time how every bit of the supply chain, upstream, downstream, how everything is impacted. And sure enough, my issue's resolved. And I can now go, either push that back to the ERP manually, programmatically, depending on the way my architecture is set up. But I really have that 360-degree view to operationalize the analytics and the HyperAuto output. And with that, I think that those are the main aspects that I kind of wanted to show around this, how we layer on top the supply chain components to really bring everything full circle.
Andy, I think the really cool thing to add here is, so again, we were able to get to this data asset within days and then deploy these kind of like what we call archetypes or common use cases on top of the data asset to go and solve these types of problems within hours. So you can see how once we're connected to ERPs or multiple ERPs, like we can go and solve this type of problem very quickly. And then as I demonstrated, as Andy demonstrated, like this is what we kind of think about in terms of a white box solution. So I can understand the underlying logic that gets the data to this point in time, to that semantic layer, and I can change it and edit it and include the nuance of my business as I want. To go even further with that, the kind of like application or workflow that Andy went through is highly editable and configurable. That is just widgets that are configured on top of that underlying data asset to expose a workflow to allow a more operational user to find that alert and ultimately go and solve it. So you can deploy that and then configure it and further configure it to include the nuance or the strategy in terms of what you would like to do within your organization. And the last thing that I think is like really, really important here is this ability to read data from the underlying ERP is not a one-way kind of like configuration. We both support reading data from and writing back data to ERPs or other systems. So at the end of that workflow, once the kind of the operational user has made a decision and said, this is how I'm going to solve this issue, I'm going to get out of this jam, we can actually commit that back to the ERP system to make that stock transfer order happen, or to make the purchase order happen, or to make a different type of like action happen within that ERP. So that is kind of like the interesting here is that like this whole end-to-end workflow is highly configurable. It deploys within the matter of hours or days, highly configurable to include the nuance of your business, include other data as necessary, but then also allows for the ability to actually execute decisions both back to Foundry and that ontology, that semantic layer, as well as back to the ERP system itself.
Foundry is an ecosystem that delivers business value. That's what people are missing. It has an opinion about how you work within their platform and how you extract value from your data. This platform is groundbreaking. And I don't know if the things are starting to drop for you now when you've watched my previous interviews and you've watched the content I've been putting out, and you're starting to realize now how game-changing this software is going to be. Soon we're going to start exploring more reference architectures that I'm hoping to have hands-on experience building in Foundry. And we may even be giving away Foundry certifications on the channel, so that and with the community, our other community members as well, so that we can create the next generation of entrepreneurs and software engineers who are raised on Foundry. So get ready, people.